Thank you, colleagues, for waiting. We start our next press briefing. We'll talk about Ukraine's law that was adopted yesterday after several attempts, and it's the law on lustration. We talked to the chief experts, Yegor Sobolev, who is head of the Lustration Committee, and Ludmila Kozlovska, who is a head of a law foundation, and there's also Oleg Osakhovsky, a person who voted for the law and who is one of the biggest lobbyists of the topic of lustration from the times when the country did not understand how important this is. And Oleg represents Svoboda party that always voted in full scope, and Agnieszka Piasecka, who did a lot together with Ludmila Kozlovska, so that this law is developed together with international experts and is understood to the international community, because Russia also applies great effort in this sphere to discredit Ukraine. So Ludmila and Agnieszka do a lot in order to help in this sphere. I'll tell you a bit about what's going on, and then my colleagues will speak. First of all, I want to congratulate all the citizens, both those who believed and those who did not believe. We did a impossible. We made these authorities to adopt the law, which is about purging them. I can't even start to describe all the measures to counteract this law at every stage. Even during the last day, when the tires were burning in front of the parliament, when everybody thought that only a miracle can salvage this document, this miracle did happen. We are very, very grateful to all political forces who voted in favor of this law, either unanimously or with a majority of votes. It's Svoboda and Batkivshchina. Also to those MPs who are in the Party of Regions, or those who previously were in the Party of Regions, because without them this wouldn't have happened. We are very much grateful to the Speaker, Alexander Turchinov, who did everything possible and impossible so that this law is adopted. He may be considered one of the parents of this law. And also my heartfelt thanks go to the team of Open Dialogue and many international experts who spend their time and talent without any reimbursement, so that they help Ukraine to adopt a good law on lustration. And of course, no great thanks to every citizen who during a year were coming to the parliament, sometimes even without any hope, and demanded that this law is adopted. So what is there in the law? First of all, the law demands that all the officials, law enforcers, and judges undergo lustration. Secondly, the law demands that when this lustration inspection is going on, people who cannot explain the origin of the property and assets of their family should be purged from all official bodies. And this is the greatest test for policemen and judges and officials who have been for years working for small salaries but still live better than French millionaires. Also, we shall purge from the powers those people who were supporting the aggression against our country In Crimea, Odessa, and other regions, if any prosecutors or judges helped, abetted in this, then they have to leave state offices. Another criteria of lustration, which is very important for us, is the behavior during Maidan. All the officials, including the administration of the president and in Kiev down to the level of districts, have to leave their state offices if during Maidan they were in top positions and were just looking at how people are being arrested or killed, and they have not applied for resignation. They have not passed a major test in their life, and they have to be purged. Very indicative is how the Russian media attacked the law. This is a long-standing dream of Svoboda Party, and yesterday it realized. I want to tell you that Oleg Bondarchuk, who is also from the party, Svoboda Party, was insisting on this, and all the KGB workers who worked for KGB or who studied in KGB schools should be dismissed from the authority. And it's very good that we have voted for this, because this is still the main channel of penetration of Kremlin agents, and we have to close this. And another point is also by Svoboda Party, which means that people shall be expelled from the authorities. Those are people who used to be members of central bodies of the Komsomol and CPSU. And this means the Central Committee of the Communist Young League of Ukraine and the district bodies of party committees. We have made a great mistake that we have not carried out anti-KGB and anti-communist lustration in early 90s. But now we have the chance to do this. I appeal to the society not to relax and to understand that this is now that lustration should start, and we live in a country where the laws are not fulfilled, and if yesterday we adopted a good document, this means that we have only got a good weapon in our hands, but we still have to use it against saboteurs and KGB people and agents of Kremlin, and the public should be the main force that will carry out lustration in Ukraine. The law says that the Ministry of Justice is the body responsible for lustration, and it has to be lustrated the first. Same, the law says that there should be a special public body composed of journalists and representatives of public organizations attached to the Ministry of Justice, and this is a control and appeal body for lustration. There's another very important article in the law. When you are lustrating any judge, any policeman, or any other person, there will be a notification on the site which will say where you can go to inform of any embezzlement or abuse of power, so that this can be checked, including those by people, including those public activists. So we need people's participation in lustration. Without you, this won't happen. In your district, in your village, in your block of flats, there is at least one bribe-taking person, and our common task is to purge them. And now I am glad to give the floor to a member of parliament who yesterday voted for this law. First of all, I have the honor to thank every Ukrainian who supported the process of lustration in Ukraine, because it is true that the law on lustration is one of the most important laws in Ukraine, due to which the system of power can be changed. So I thank those people who came yesterday, not only yesterday, to the parliament to make MPs vote for the law. And you know, some people came to me during the voting and they said, you know, I am also the object of this law because I studied at the KGB school, but I still will vote for it. This is the Ukrainian community and the Ukrainian public that was able to make the MPs vote for this law. And the Svoboda party has been dreaming about this for years. And you know that our leader, Oleg Ternebok, as long ago as in 2005, submitted the draft law on lustration, which was not supported, and the regime of Yanukovych came to power, and they have destroyed the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian economy. And at the moment, all of us, politicians and public and journalists, should do everything possible for this lustration process to happen in the Ukrainian state. Yesterday there were, you know, those shouters who constantly shouting about lustration and bribery and corruption in the parliament. They were not present yesterday in the parliament and they did not vote. So we should together do everything possible so that happens lustration, so that all those KGBs and those scoundrels who served Yanukovych be removed from the power, and the Ukrainian society carries out lustration in Ukraine, including the Ukrainian parliament, because you know that in the parliament almost 50% are agents of Kremlin, and we need lustration in the Ukrainian army because we know how they betray Ukrainian positions and Ukrainian military. We hope and we will do everything possible so that this law is implemented and starts to act, and I think that together we will halt lustration and will purge Ukraine of those scoundrels who are still within Ukrainian power. On behalf of Open Dialogue Fund, I want to thank our partners, and over half a year that we've been working together, we see that our cooperation was not in vain. When we are now starting to implement the law, I am absolutely in agreement with Yegor that we should use this instrument. There are two tasks that we pose before ourselves as a foundation: declarations and the assurances from our European partners that they will be able to cooperate after this law is signed in Ukraine. And again, there's practical exchange of and borrowing of experience. Now our visits were to Czech and Poland, but we'll go to Germany now because the experience of Germany after the war can be very relevant to Ukraine. Thank you very much. I congratulate you all. This can be called a victory, but as you said, the work really starts only after the law was adopted. What about the enforcement of the law? Of course, there will be a lot of resistance, and there is already resistance. That's why I was late for the press conference, because together with other co-authors of the law, I spent several hours struggling for the law to remain in the form that it was voted for. I won't go into all details, but the fight's going on around every point, and you know that often a lot depends in the law on a comma or a semicolon. We have won the last battle. Sergei Lyovochkin, with the hands of his people, tries to avoid lustration, but we tell that every official of Yanukovych's time who were in highest offices, this means head of administration, prime minister, and ministers, about the prosecutor general, head of state security service, head of foreign intelligence, they have to be automatically lustrated. They were building a unique kleptocratic regime who have robbed the country of billions of dollars, and they finished with the shooting of their own people. They should be deprived of any opportunity to come back to the bodies of power, and I think that some of them should be purged because they did not go with Yanukovych abroad and try to disguise themselves as Ukrainian officials. Is there a designated unit in the Ministry of Justice that will be overseeing the Ministry of Justice? We said that there's good and bad news for the Minister of Justice, Pavlo Petrenko, and the good news is that lustration will be organized and controlled by the Ministry of Justice, because this is a powerful ministry with good access to databases and representatives in every region of Ukraine. But bad news is that the lustration should start from the Ministry of Justice. The logic is that first you have to lustrate a body of power, which then should be entrusted with lustrating other bodies of power. At the moment, the chief task is not to allow to rewrite the law, to delete important points from here, and not to allow those who have to be purged from bodies of power remain there. Any questions? Can you tell us, if we compare with the draft law during the first reading and now, were the essential changes in this? I can tell you, well, there was 1 million of amendments and there were 10 million rounds of negotiations, and I have passed through too many of them to tell you everything. I can tell you about what I disagree with in the law and what I should add there. First, I think that we shall come to the lustration of elected offices. In the very first version of the law, we suggested that all candidates for the parliament should go through lustration. And if they don't, our proposal was that the voters should be informed, sorry, your candidate is a KGB person, or can't explain why his wife, who has been a housewife for the entire life, owns 8 houses. In the last version of the law, the lustration of candidates was expelled, and the elections were announced several weeks before our law was passed. Other ideas that were crossed out of the law, I think they are within the measure of healthy compromise or inability of our state to implement the law. Another example, from the very start we suggested that all family members of all officials are inspected for their property, including grandsons and great-great-fathers. We understand that these people very often give their property to anyone related. And the last version says that anyone should explain the origin of the property and assets of those family members with whom she or he lives together. And of course, if you have a sister who doesn't want to tell you about her property but lives separately, then we have no legal right to make her. And I think that this law should be regarded as a temporary one, as was done by the Poles, who first adopted the law and then adopted a better one. We should adopt this law, see who of the scoundrels is still in the bodies of power, and then adopt another law which will finish their sufferance. And there's not going to be a miracle, and we have a totally kleptocratic state. What we need to do is not to purge bad officials, but to see how we can retain good officials. The judges say that a maximum of 30 judges are judges, but the rest are just entrepreneurs in mantles. There is not going to be a simple, easy battle for the purge of this system, which has almost 1 million people who are connected with different means. So it only starts. We got weapons yesterday, now we should learn and together win over the enemy. Any other questions? Lustration among officials is understood, but what about the lustration in the military or scientists or maybe even journalists? You understand what I mean? How possible and how feasible this is according to this project? I'll voice the opinion that's implemented in the law, but I think that colleagues will comment as well. The illustration of generals of the General Staff and the Ministry of Defense is a super important task. We fought as lions in order to retain this point in the law, so all the commanders in the army, whatever bosses in the army, whether they have shoulder loops or not, should go through illustration. Only conscripted, drafted soldiers are exempt from this. And we have such a terrible state that we should first lustrate the state. And we probably shouldn't lustrate public professions, but maybe we should do it as a second stage. First of all, it is very pleasing that this law that we have voted for was worked out on the basis of our law that was submitted by the party Svoboda, and the points that you mentioned were in our law. Partially, of course, those points have not entered the law that we voted for, but something like 70% are there, and at the moment we are repelling the attacks from those scoundrels who should be subjects to lustration, and they want to make amendments in the law after the law has been passed. And we also ask journalists to take part, to engage, so that this law is made operational without any changes. And I think that in the future, when the real Ukrainians will come to the Ukrainian parliament and they will vote for the new law on lustration, as Poland and Georgia did, and this law is going to be stricter. And all those who are not covered by this law of lustration will in the future be subject to that new law, and we will purge our authorities of those scoundrels and corruptionists who are still there. I think that journalist lustration can be done by journalists themselves. You know very well who writes what and why. So this is first of all your level of awareness and what you can do and how you can watch what they do. If we don't have any more questions, I want to launch another important thing. At the moment, there's a technology on the internet that no one knows what they voted for. They are not publishing the text. I want to tell you why this happened. As we understand, there's a very small part of the parliament who really wanted lustration, and the bigger part of the power that be, not only in the parliament, wanted this law not to be even considered by this parliament. And you remember that the best months for the adoption of this law in spring, right after the Euromaidan victory, they were lost because the law was not put for vote. Only after immense pressure of united people, the parliament started to consider this law, and as a result passed it. But until the very last day, we saw the sabotage of this law on the part of people who had to answer according to this law. You know, for instance, that between the first and second reading, the MPs have the right to submit amendments, and there were almost 400 amendments submitted, but the committee responsible for considering the law was not assembled at all. We came there and we saw David Zhvania, who was telling us with a smile that communists and the regionals have not come. And for the last time, this happened yesterday during the interval before the voting. Another bad thing is that the amendments that were collected by this committee we could not get, even we, co-authors of the law. We asked them to give us the information about who suggested what, and they were telling, you know, this is a huge task, and our salary is so small, we won't be able to do this fast. And the comparative chart was not handed out to MPs, and the MPs from those factions that did not take part in the development of the law and who did not want very much to adopt it, they understood still that they should vote for it. They were asking, give us an idea of what we are voting for, but there was no chart because the secretariat workers have not prepared it. More than that, after it was handed out, there was a lot of mistakes, and the reason why there's no text on the side of the parliament is because of the subversive work during the preparation of the law, and with the desire to rewrite the law after it was adopted. First problem we have overcome, we will overcome another problem. When are we going to see the first results of lustration? Let's be realistic. At the moment, we have to look at every comma, see that everything is good. Then the head of the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada will sign it and send it to the president. Yesterday, the president, I think through his Facebook, said that he greets the country with the adoption of this law. I think this is a very important proof of his intentions, and as soon as the law is signed, we will start to fight for its implementation. The country is ready. The country is collecting the information about traitors and corruptioners and all this kind of stuff. Which sources are you going to use when you will be looking into corruption things, and what is the period under scrutiny while the activity of those officials is concerned? If you mention KGB, is it going to be only about the Soviet times or the period of independence as well? Everyone who is in their office at the moment, and also everyone who will be appointed, will be going through a lustration checkup. If you were in KGB, this does not mean anything when you were there. You should be expelled. If you were at a leading position in a top office during Maidan, it is understood that you should be thrown out if you cannot explain the origins of your property and assets, or of your wife, or your children. Then everything will be checked, and you should understand, explain it with your income during the state service. If you were a millionaire and came to serve the state with your planes and houses and yachts, which happens to some of our officials, then evidently you won't have to explain this, because they were with you as a property and assets gained before you came to the state service. As the law contains a lot of points, we will use the entire state machinery and all information from pension fund to the tax service, which will allow to answer the questions. There will be illustration declarations, then there will be a public body that will use the information from citizens. We have successfully tested this mechanism in spring, where they held contests for the head of police regions. Thank you very much, the drivers of this law. Thank you, the Polish experts who helped them, and I also thank the political force that's been in support of this law for the entire process, and thank you.